When you open history books or watch Hollywood films, you encounter a single female profile, Cleopatra. She is a seductress who plays men like puppets, a lustful femme fatale, an Eastern witch who leads Rome's disciplined generals astray. Think of Elizabeth Taylor's purple eyes, naked dancers dancing with snakes, and milk baths. But what if I told you that 90% of this was war propaganda invented by her enemy, Emperor Augustus, to destroy her? What if I told you that this most famous woman in history was not a beauty queen, but a linguist who spoke 9 languages, an admiral who commanded a navy, a scientist who wrote medical texts, and a head of state who enacted economic reforms? Today, we're putting aside the sex symbol, legend gathering dust on history's shelves. Today, you will meet the real Cleopatra Seventhia Philopator, who stayed awake in the corridors of the Library of Alexandria, experimented with poisons in her lab, and kept her country standing against Rome for 20 years. If you're ready, we're heading to the shores of the Nile, to the last great fortress of the ancient world. First, let's get one thing straight. Cleopatra was not Egyptian. She was a pure-blooded Macedonian Greek, descended from Ptolemy I, one of Alexander the Great's generals. Her family, the Ptolemaic dynasty, had ruled Egypt for nearly 300 years, but they were disconnected from the people. In the palace, Greek was spoken, and Greek gods were worshipped. But Cleopatra was different. When she was born in 69 BCE, the dynasty was in decline. Yet, amid palace incest and throne struggles, she devoted herself to science and culture. Historian Plutarch tells us that her voice was like a multi-stringed instrument. Why? Because Cleopatra was the first and only ruler in the dynasty's history to take the trouble to learn the Egyptian language. And not just Egyptian. She could speak Ethiopic, Hebrew, Arabic, Syriac, Median, and Parthian. Imagine a queen conversing with foreign envoys without an interpreter. This was not just a hobby, it was a strategic move. I speak your language. I am one of you. At that time, Alexandria was the world center of science. Cleopatra was its brightest student. She studied not only politics, but also medicine, cosmetics, and mathematics. Medieval Arab sources refer to her not as a queen, but as Al-Hakima, meaning wise woman. She wrote medical prescriptions, experimented with poisons, and even wrote books on weight measurement systems. So here we see not just a decorated woman, but an intellectual in a lab coat. After her father's death, she ascended the throne at 18, but things did not go smoothly. Her brother and husband, Ptolemy XIII, exiled her, and it was at this very moment that Rome's most powerful man, Julius Caesar, arrived in Alexandria. Now, you all know that famous scene. Cleopatra wrapped in a carpet and rolled in front of Caesar. Visual. The carpet scene is crossed out with a red X. In its place appears a bedding sack or dirty laundry bag visual. When we look at the original text of historian Plutarch, the word carpet doesn't appear. She was probably inside a bedding sack or a linen bag. This was less about a sexy surprise and more a military infiltration to get past enemy soldiers alive. Cleopatra, at 21, faced 52-year-old Caesar not with beauty, but with her intelligence, courage, and political vision. What did she offer Caesar? Only love? No. She offered him Egypt's grain, its wealth, and the astronomical knowledge of Alexandria. Caesar even consulted the Egyptian astronomer Sosigenes, whom Cleopatra had brought, when reforming the Roman calendar, the Julian calendar. Cleopatra's hand is even at the foundation of the calendar we use today. From this union, Caesarion was born, the little Caesar. When Cleopatra went to Rome with Caesar, the women there began imitating her hairstyle, jewelry, and style. But Roman senators, especially Cicero, hated her. She was a living challenge to Rome's republic values, a bold embodiment of pride and monarchy. After Caesar's assassination, Cleopatra barely escaped and fled to Egypt. But the game was just beginning. When she returned to Egypt, a disaster awaited her, famine. The Nile hadn't flooded, and the people were starving. Here, we see Cleopatra's stateswoman side. She immediately opened the royal granaries to the public, but she acted strategically. There are claims that she excluded Alexandria's Jewish population from this distribution, demonstrating her political pragmatism. To fix the economy, she carried out a currency reform. Today, numismatics experts marvel at how Cleopatra fought inflation by stabilizing the value of her bronze coins. The face on these coins does not resemble Elizabeth Taylor. Arched nose, strong chin. She was trying to resemble her father because she needed to prove her legitimacy. She sold power, not beauty. She presented herself as the new Isis, NEA Isis. Isis was Egypt's most powerful mother goddess. For the devout Egyptian people, this was a statement. I am your living goddess. Cleopatra used this religious propaganda so effectively that the people of Egypt embraced this Greek-speaking queen as a true pharaoh. And onto the scene enters Marcus Antonius, Caesar's heir, master of the Eastern Roman provinces. Cleopatra met him in Tarsus. But what a meeting! Plutarch writes that from under the stern of her ship, her sails were purple, the most expensive color, and her silver oars touched the water to the sound of music. She was dressed like Aphrodite, while Antonius imagined himself as Dionysus, the god of wine. This was a theatrical wedding of a political alliance. Together, they returned to Alexandria and founded one of history's most fascinating clubs, the Mimetobioi, meaning unique lives or inimitable living ones. This was not just a place to drink and party. It was a demonstration of the wealth and culture of the Hellenistic East against the dullness of Rome. The famous pearl bet happened here. Cleopatra told Antonius, I can spend 10 million sesterces on a single meal. They didn't believe her. Cleopatra removed the priceless pearl earring from her ear, dropped it into a bowl of vinegar, and drank the mixture. Today, scientists say it was possible. If the vinegar is strong enough and the pearl slightly crushed, the calcium carbonate dissolves in acid. This act was proof of how Cleopatra wielded her wealth as a weapon. Your most precious treasures are but a sip of drink for me. Their relationship was not only romantic. In 34 BCE, during the event known as the Donations of Alexandria, Antony distributed Roman territories to Cleopatra's children. Caesarion was declared King of Kings. This was the final straw for Octavian, the future Augustus, in Rome. The Roman legacy was being handed over to an Egyptian woman and her children. War was inevitable. Cleopatra Seventhia Philopator, 69 BCE, 30 BCE, the last pharaoh of Egypt and the final active ruler of the Ptolemaic dynasty, is one of the most debated yet paradoxically least understood figures in ancient history. For centuries, historical narratives have confined her to the archetype of the femme fatale, a seductive and deadly woman, shaped largely by the political propaganda of victorious Romans. However, as modern biographers Stacy Schiff and Dwayne Roller have also noted, Cleopatra's true identity presents the portrait of an intellectual ruler who resisted Rome's male-dominated military hegemony through diplomatic acumen, economic reform, and cultural synthesis. Nearly all primary sources on Cleopatra, Plutarch, Cassius Dio, Appian, Suetonius, were written after her death and under the shadow of the regime that destroyed her. For example, the poet Horace referred to her as Fatale Monstrum, ill-omened monster, while Propertius labeled her Meretrix Regina, prostitute queen. These texts should be read less as historical documentation and more as instruments legitimizing Augustus's civil war. In contrast, medieval Arab sources depict Cleopatra as a wise woman, alchemist, and medical scholar, presenting an image entirely distinct from Western gendered narratives. This report synthesizes these dual narratives, analyzing Cleopatra not only as a lover, but also as a geopolitical chess player, a linguist, and a naval commander. The Ptolemaic dynasty and Cleopatra's identity. 1.1 Genealogy and genetic heritage. The Ptolemaic dynasty was founded in 305 BCE by Ptolemy I Soter, one of Alexander the Great's generals, and was Macedonian Greek in origin. The dynasty ruled Egypt for 3 centuries, while carefully maintaining its Greek cultural and genetic identity. This preservation instinct brought with it the practice of sibling marriages, incest, as a means of imitating pharaonic traditions. Cleopatra VII was the daughter of Ptolemy XII Auletes. While her mother's identity is not definitively known, it is generally assumed to have been Ptolemy's sister and wife, Cleopatra V. Tryphonina. Ancient sources other than Strabo do not claim that Cleopatra's lineage was illegitimate. Modern historian Dwayne Roller has proposed that her mother may have been a semi-Egyptian noblewoman associated with the top priests in Memphis, but the prevailing scholarly consensus is that Cleopatra was predominantly of Macedonian Greek blood and culturally identified as a Hellen. What distinguished Cleopatra from her ancestors, however, was that she was the first Ptolemaic ruler to learn the Egyptian language and culture, not merely for governance, but to internalize it. Education and intellectual formation. During Cleopatra's birth and upbringing, Alexandria was the intellectual capital of the Mediterranean. The Mouseion, the Library and Museum of Alexandria, hosted the brightest minds of the era. Cleopatra's education extended beyond classical Greek rhetoric, philosophy, and literature, encompassing the positive sciences as well. Plutarch notes that she spoke not only Egyptian, but also Ethiopic, Hebrew, Arabic, Syriac, Median, and Parthian. This multilingualism was not merely an academic curiosity, but a highly strategic governance tool. Cleopatra could communicate directly with foreign envoys and the diverse ethnic groups within her realm, Egyptians, Jews, Arabs, without the need for interpreters. This ability gave her a diplomatic advantage and reinforced her divine image. Arab sources claim that she produced works in mathematics, medicine, and alchemy. In particular, her treatise Cosmetics is considered a pharmacological text, indicating deep expertise in poisons and antidotes. Physical appearance and the seductress myth. 2.1 Cinematic image versus historical reality. In modern popular culture, portrayals of Cleopatra by actresses such as Elizabeth Taylor, 1963, emphasize flawless physical beauty. However, ancient sources and numismatic evidence present a more nuanced picture. Plutarch notes that her beauty was not incomparable or immediately striking. Her true allure lay in her character, her voice, and her intelligence. The description that her tongue was like a multi-stringed instrument highlights that her rhetorical skill was a far more potent weapon than physical appearance. 2.2 Numismatic and archaeological evidence. Coins minted during Cleopatra's reign, tetradrachms, provide the most realistic depictions of her. These coins show Cleopatra with an arched and prominent nose, a hawk nose, a strong chin, and pronounced cheekbones. Her hair was typically arranged in the melanin friser, melon slice, style and adorned with a royal diadem. These masculine and powerful depictions, resembling her father Ptolemy XII, were used deliberately as propaganda to reinforce her claim to the throne. The emphasis was on power and lineage rather than beauty. Marble busts in Berlin's Altes Museum and the Vatican Museum align with these coin profiles. While these sculptures present a Hellenistic queenly image, Egyptian temples, such as the reliefs at the Temple of Dendera, depict her in a fully traditional Egyptian style, as a goddess. This dual visual language, Hellenistic for Greeks, Pharaoh for Egyptians, demonstrates Cleopatra's skill in appealing to a multicultural society. Political achievements and governance strategies. Domestic policy and economic management. When Cleopatra ascended the throne in 51 BCE, Egypt was in a difficult position due to debts to Rome, famine, and internal unrest. She immediately had to confront food shortages caused by insufficient Nile floods. By opening the grain stores in Alexandria to the public and maintaining good relations with the priestly class, she prevented social unrest. Economically, Cleopatra imposed strict oversight on the complex bureaucracy of Ptolemaic Egypt. She reformed tax collection mechanisms and stabilized the value of bronze coins to combat inflation. Her economic policies were so successful that she amassed a treasury capable of financing first Caesar and later Antony. During the Roman civil wars, under her reign, Egypt remained the Mediterranean's granary and a center for luxury goods production, glass, papyrus, ointments. Religious syncretism and the Nea-Isis ideology. Cleopatra went further than her ancestors in presenting herself as a living goddess, introducing herself as Nea-Isis, New Isis. Isis was a powerful symbol of motherhood, magic, and rebirth in ancient Egypt, and was also popular in the Greek world. By adopting this identity, Cleopatra gained the religious loyalty of her Egyptian subjects and positioned herself as a universal divine figure. This theocratic policy also played a role in foreign relations. In her relationship with Julius Caesar, she identified with Venus, the Roman counterpart of Isis. While in her alliance with Marcus Antony, she employed the dual imagery of Dionysus Osiris and Isis Aphrodite. This allowed her to present her political alliance with Antony not merely as a strategic partnership, but as a cosmic and divine union. Relationship with Julius Caesar, the architecture of an alliance, the Alexandrian War, and return to the throne. In 48 BCE, during her power struggle with her brother Ptolemy XIII, Cleopatra was expelled from Alexandria. Following the death of Pompey and Julius Caesar's arrival in the city, she seized a historic opportunity. While her brother's army besieged the city, Cleopatra had to enter the palace secretly. Contrary to popular legend, she was not rolled in a carpet, but likely concealed in a bed sack or a linen bag to meet Caesar. This daring move impressed 52-year-old Caesar with the intellect and courage of the 21-year-old queen. Caesar made Cleopatra co-ruler, which triggered the Alexandrian War. Caesar's legions fought fiercely against the Egyptian army. During the conflict, the burning of the Library of Alexandria, or the warehouses at the harbor, occurred. Ultimately, following Caesar's victory, Cleopatra married her other brother, Ptolemy XIV, in a ceremonial arrangement and became sole ruler. Nile voyage and Caesarion. After the war, Caesar stayed in Egypt rather than returning immediately to Rome, embarking on a months-long voyage with Cleopatra along the Nile River on the colossal luxury ship known as the Thalamigos. This journey served as both a triumphal tour and a demonstration of Egypt's wealth and Cleopatra's divine authority. From this union, Caesar's only biological son, Ptolemy XV Caesarion, Little Caesar, was born. Caesarion's existence gave Cleopatra unprecedented leverage in Roman politics, as Caesar's nephew Octavian was only an adoptive heir. Visit to Rome, 46 to 44 BCE. Cleopatra visited Rome with her son, residing in Caesar's villa in Trastevere. During this period, Caesar erected a golden statue of Cleopatra in the Temple of Venus Genetrix, flouting traditional Roman Republican norms. Her presence in Rome, though unsettling to conservative senators like Cicero, profoundly influenced Roman fashion, hairstyles, and jewelry. Roman women began to emulate Cleopatra-style hair buns. However, after Caesar's assassination in 44 BCE, Cleopatra, fearing for her life, quickly returned to Egypt, meeting at Tarsus and logistical brilliance. After Caesar's assassination, control over the eastern provinces was assigned to Marcus Antonius under the Second Triumvirate. In 41 BCE, Antonius summoned Cleopatra to Tarsus, modern-day Mersin, Turkey. Cleopatra transformed this meeting from a mere act of submission into a display of power. She arrived on the Cydnus River aboard a ship gilded in gold, with purple sails and silver oars, dressed as Isis Aphrodite. This spectacular visual impressed Antonius, who imagined himself as Dionysus, and initiated a political and romantic alliance that would last for 10 years. The Inimitable Livers Society. During the winter they spent together in Alexandria, 41 to 40 BCE, Antonius and Cleopatra established a society called Imimatobioi, inimitable livers, or unique lives. Roman sources depict it as a realm of indulgence and pleasure, but in reality, this circle was a religious and political alliance centered on the cult of Dionysus. The famous dissolving of the pearl in vinegar anecdote occurred during this period. According to Pliny, Cleopatra claimed that she could spend 10 million sestertii on a single dinner, and to demonstrate, she dissolved a priceless pearl earring in a cup of vinegar and drank it. Chemical analysis shows that for calcium carbonate pearl to dissolve in acetic acid vinegar, the pearl must be crushed beforehand, or the vinegar must be exceptionally strong, making this act theoretically possible. This gesture demonstrated Cleopatra's ability to use wealth as a political and psychological tool. Her resources were a display of power as much as extravagance. Gift of the Pergamum Library. Plutarch reports that Antonius, as a token of love and respect, gifted Cleopatra 200,000 parchment rolls from the library of Pergamum, which were transported to Alexandria. This act can be seen as an effort to restore the Library of Alexandria, damaged in the fires during Caesar's campaigns. Some modern historians interpret this as Roman propaganda, portraying Antonius as surrendering Roman heritage, but it also reinforces Cleopatra's status as a patron of intellectual life. Donations of Alexandria and the geopolitical turning point, the apex, and simultaneously the beginning of the end, of the Cleopatra-Antonius alliance was the donations of Alexandria ceremony in 34 BCE. At this event, the duo sat on golden thrones established at the Gymnasium in Alexandria and distributed Roman and Parthian territories to their children, openly challenging the authority of the Roman Senate. This public assertion of dynastic ambition and territorial claims set the stage for the eventual conflict with Octavian, future Augustus, and made war unavoidable. Actium, strategy, technology, and the betrayal narrative, navy and technology. The Battle of Actium in 31 BCE was one of the largest naval engagements of the ancient world. Antony and Cleopatra's fleet consisted of massive quinquiremes, 5-oared warships. These ships were like floating fortresses, equipped with catapults and towers for soldiers, but they lacked maneuverability. In contrast, Octavian's Admiral Agrippa employed smaller, faster, and more agile Liburnian ships. Cleopatra personally commanded the Egyptian navy. Her reserve fleet of 60 ships carried the treasury and was decisive in determining the outcome of the battle. Course of the battle and tactical analysis. Roman propaganda and popular historical accounts suggest that Cleopatra fled in fear during the battle, and Antony abandoned his fleet out of love to follow her. However, modern military analysis, Barry Strauss et al., indicates that this was a premeditated strategic breakout maneuver. On the day of the battle, the wind blew from the north-northwest. Antony's fleet, trapped by Agrippa's blockade, was cornered. Cleopatra's ships used the wind to their advantage, sailing out and breaking through the blockade. Antony followed her as planned. The goal was not to save the entire fleet, but to secure the treasury and leadership cadre and retreat to Egypt to continue the war. Therefore, what appears as a flight was actually a tactical withdrawal and regrouping. However, the remaining fleet that stayed behind surrendered, undermining the overall strategy. Death, science, and mythology. Method of suicide, a toxicological perspective. When Octavian entered Alexandria, Antony committed suicide 30 BC. Cleopatra attempted to negotiate with Octavian, but, realizing she would be paraded in chains during his victory procession, chose to end her life. The traditional story holds that she allowed a poisonous cobra, ASP, to bite her after it was smuggled into the palace in a basket of figs. This tale references the protective cobra, Uraeus, a symbol of Egyptian royalty, and reinforces Cleopatra's divine status. However, modern experts like Christoph Schaefer and ancient toxicology evidence suggest that a snake bite is unpredictable, extremely painful, and slow, causing hours of necrosis and vomiting. For someone as knowledgeable about poisons as Cleopatra, author of Cosmetics, it is unlikely she would have risked such an uncertain death. She probably consumed a mixture of hemlock, wolfsbane, and opium, an effective, painless, and certain lethal cocktail. The snake narrative may have originated from Octavian's propaganda, which showcased a statue of Cleopatra holding a cobra during his victory parade, or from later misinterpretations. The mystery of the tomb, Taposiris Magna. The tombs of Cleopatra and Antony have never been definitively located. Plutarch states that they were buried in a magnificent and enormous monument in Alexandria. However, the royal quarter of Alexandria is now submerged. In recent years, Dr. Kathleen Martinez has proposed that their tomb may lie at the Taposiris Magna Temple, 45 kilometers west of Alexandria. This temple is dedicated to Osiris, with whom Antony was associated. Excavations have uncovered Cleopatra engraved coins, tunnels, and Greco-Roman period mummies, but the royal burial chamber has not yet been found. Cleopatra's legacy. Cleopatra VII was one of history's most skilled survival artists. She managed to extend Egypt's independence for another 20 years in the face of Rome's inevitable rise, and skillfully steered Rome's two most powerful men, Caesar and Antony, toward her strategic objectives. She was not merely a lover. She was an economist managing monetary policy, an admiral commanding a navy, a multilingual diplomat, and a scientist authoring medical texts. Augustan Rome, propaganda erased her intellectual and political achievements, replacing them with the image of a woman who supposedly destroyed empires through sexual allure. Yet numismatic evidence, Arabic sources, and modern archaeology lift this veil, revealing the true face of the last great Hellenistic ruler of the ancient world. With her death, Egypt became a Roman province, but her bloodline continued through her daughter Cleopatra Selene II in the royal family of Mauritania, and her intellectual legacy persisted in Islamic-era texts on alchemy and medicine. 31 BC, the Battle of Actium. Octavian's fleet faces the combined navy of Cleopatra and Mark Antony. History books usually claim that Cleopatra panicked in the middle of the battle and fled, and that Antony chased her out of love. A major lie. Modern military historians believe this was a planned breakout maneuver. The battle was being lost. The wind had shifted, and Cleopatra opened a corridor to save the treasury and part of the fleet, return to Egypt, and continue the war from there. This was not a flight. It was a strategic retreat. But when Antony's soldiers did not follow them and surrendered instead, the plan collapsed. Octavian could not present this war as a civil war. That would upset the Roman people. So he declared the war not against Antony, but against the foreign queen. He portrayed Cleopatra as a prostitute, a sorceress, a witch who had bewitched Antony. The femme fatale image we know today is the product of this Augustan propaganda. And the end. 30 BC. Octavian entered Alexandria. Antony committed suicide. Cleopatra understood that Octavian would parade her in chains through the streets of Rome, so she wrote her own ending. Legend says she killed herself by letting a cobra, an asp, bite her. Very poetic, isn't it? Dying with the royal symbol of Egypt. But unrealistic. A cobra bite is painful, slow, and causes vomiting. A scientist who studied poisons in her book Cosmetics would never choose such a risky, ugly death. German historian Christoph Schaefer and toxicologists believe she most likely drank a mixture of opium, hemlock, and monkshood. A painless, quick, and body-preserving clean death. The snake story was probably a final symbolic gesture emphasizing her divine status. Cleopatra is dead. Her tomb, likely together with her lover Antony, still waits to be found, either beneath the waters of Alexandria or at Taposiris Magna. But her legacy lives on. She should be remembered not for her loves, but for her management of the economy, her multilingual diplomacy, and her scientific curiosity. Forget the ridiculous internet myths, like the story that she invented a vibrator, the pumpkin full of bees legend. She was the last Hellenistic ruler to resist Rome's overwhelming, masculine power with her intelligence. Octavian Augustus tried to erase her from history, destroy her statues, and defame her name. But he failed. Even 2,000 years later, we are still talking about her. Perhaps that is her greatest victory.